For a while, as a Red Sox fan, I thought that the Mookie Betts trade was potentially going to go down as one of the worst sports trades of all time. I think it still is probably up there in the top five for sure. But over the weekend at midnight Eastern, so I saw the news like the next morning. Luca has been traded to the Lakers for some picks and players and Anthony Davis. And if I am a Dallas Mavericks fan, I think I think that I would have to rescind my fandom of that team. Be it like I keep being blown away by this trade, if I'm going to be completely honest, because they just went to the finals. Like I don't. I mean, I guess I no, I don't understand it. And I'll even say, playing devil's advocate a little bit, if the team wasn't happy with him, you're trying to tell me that like they they couldn't get whoever the next big superstar is. Like they couldn't get the first overall play. They got Anthony Davis. Like it is really like, I understand Anthony Davis. He's a good player, top, but he is on the latter half of his career. Like I don't know. It's the trade is really just it's insane. It will be probably like the Paul George, Shea Gilchrist, Alexander trade. That will be like potentially one of the worst of all time, especially in the NBA. I mean, NBA wise, this is probably the worst trade of all time. I think you could have looked at the Oklahoma City and the Clippers. I think when they traded Shea Gilchrist, Alexander for Paul George, and then a bunch of other picks, that one was probably the one of the worst NBA trades of all time. I think this ends up going down as one of the worst, just because they just went to the finals. Like they couldn't figure it out. Like if I'm the owner, the GM is fired. You're done. You're done right now. You're done this. You're done right now. If you are if you are the owner of the Mavericks, Mark Cuban, which I think he is kind of a minority owner now. I think he sold some of his stake in the team. But if you're the owner, or you're the president of basketball operations, hey buddy, you're the one that's getting traded to the Lakers. Like you're trading the GM to the Lakers. You don't trade Luca. Like it's crazy. Okay, so from a sports card perspective, this I guess is best case scenario if you own any Luca cards. I mean, I think the him winning a championship in Dallas, making it to the championship last year was great. I think for him, winning the championship would have been great. I don't think they stood a chance. I mean, the Celtics were. The NBA is very weird. The NBA media is very weird because the Celtics were last year. They were statistically one of the best teams of all time, but up until like literally the clock was running down and they were winning the championship, people were calling them overrated and they were giving them respect, which maybe this could be just me seeing rage bait on Twitter and maybe it isn't everybody, but it's like Tatum not being in the MVP conference. I don't know. It's the NBA's media around the Celtics is very odd. So it's like, Luka, what else could you want from him? I mean, he's in the prime of his career, and you're just gonna like because now what? Now LeBron is gonna have Luka because now LeBron has another 2, 3, 4 years if he's gonna play with. Which, granted, I think Luka has to sign. I'm pretty sure he's coming up on a contract extension. Which that's the other thing. If I'm Luka, I'm looking at the Mavericks, and the Mavericks basically cost him $100 million because I think there was something where it's like if you don't change teams, you can add an extra year and you can add certain money to a contract for the max contract, which I believe it was like 5 years, 350 million. And now I think it's 4 years, 230 or something. So it's like they literally cost him like $100 million. It's actually insane what has happened here. And if you're Luka, I don't know. I'm sure there's probably other ways you can make that money somehow, but it's like, I don't know. It's crazy. And I'm glad that on one hand, I'm glad that this type of trade didn't happen a couple years ago because we saw Luka cards really become sort of, I don't know, the currency of the hobby. Like that's one way I would put it because of how many there were, because how many were selling every single day. I think it's interesting that, I think it's the one thing that I do find interesting about that card is that there are over 20,000 PSA 10s and it's still a $300 card, which I don't know exactly like where this card goes. Maybe it goes up to 400, maybe it goes up to 500, maybe it doesn't move at all because there's so many. But it has a market cap of like 6 million, which if you look at other cards in that similar category, I'm sure like Zion, for example, like that one you're looking at like like a 50 $60 card for a PSA 10. The market cap with a similar number of PSA 10s. So the market cap is going to be much lower, obviously. And so I don't know exactly what happens here with his cards. Like I don't think Luke here's the thing. I don't think Luca cards at $300 is the best way that you could spend your money if you're trying to make money in the industry. Because I think yes, they could go up in value if they win the championship, if he goes on and has a crazy rest of the season, which I think if I'm not mistaken, he's not eligible to win MVP this year because he's been hurt for a decent amount of games and you have to play a certain amount of games to be eligible for the MVP. So I fairly certain from I saw a headline like a week or two ago that he isn't eligible for it anymore. Um, so I don't know what you make it to the finals. Maybe you sell him during the finals. I don't know if you're playing the Celtics again. I just don't see how. Like I don't know if this is going to be the Celtics again in the championship. I mean the team is the same as last year and they were the best team, or they were they were the fifth best playoff team of all time. They had the fifth best playoff record. So it's like what happens there really? And I know that the Celtics are kind of going through a little bit of a slump, but it's like it's the middle of the season. It is February actually. So it's I don't know. That's just what happens here at this point of the season. But so do the cards go up? I just think at $300, there's cards with higher upside, in my opinion. You could buy with $300. Like diversify. I think, yeah, that's how I would put it. If you're looking to buy Luca cards, I would say $300 is a fine price for the card, I guess. But like if you're looking to buy and sell the card, $300, it's going to be there are other cards that you could buy for much cheaper that you're going to see a higher percentage return on. And maybe even quicker too. Like I think I'm just looking at Card Ladder and it says like the last sold was 300, which if you're looking over the course of like a 2-year span, like let's look at just a month. Even I mean, I guess in a month it is well, actually shoot. So okay, sorry, let me fix this a little bit. The cards have already gone up in value. If you looked at the price of a PSA 10 Luca last week, they were 170. Now you're looking at 300. So yeah, I don't think the Luka card at 300 is a buy. Definitely. I let's just put it that way. I think if you had them and you maybe were buying them at 100, 150, $200, you're probably sitting pretty right now. You're probably sitting very good. And I would be selling probably if you can double your money in the sports card industry, that's something you should do. Like if you can go from buying a card for 150 and selling it for 300, whether you think the card could go higher, I think is a risk that some people are willing to take, a risk, in my opinion, that there are other players you can put money into or other cards that you could put money into that would have a lower no, what is it? It's a lower floor, no, a higher floor, lower floor, where Luca is one of these players in the NBA. He's very similar to Mike Trout, where it's like he hasn't won a championship, but people consider him one of the best players in the league. I think that also was reflected in the price of his cards. With 20,000 of those cards also, it's like you can probably but hypothetically, if you could buy in bulk for 200 a piece and sell them each for 300, I don't know how many you'd have to buy necessarily for that to really be the price you can get. But there's a chance that you could if you buy them at a show, maybe. But then you got to look at taxes, and I don't know if it's exactly worth trying to do that. But either way, I think this is one of the worst basketball trades of all time. It's just so as a Celtics fan, I'm like, oh well, maybe we're gonna play the Lakers this year in the championship, or like, I don't know. It just is unfortunate for Cavaliers. It's unfortunate for Mavericks fans because how do you have Luka and you let maybe it's the owner that doesn't like Luca, and if that's the case, then okay, fine. But it's like how can from a business standpoint, how can you look at this trade and even think that it's a good idea? It really is just mind blowing. And I don't know, we're close to the NBA trade deadline, so maybe there's going to be other trades. But if I had to guess, I mean, this is one of the biggest trades in NBA history, I would say. So the chances that we see a trade bigger than this, like unless like the Celtics trade Tatum and Brown, that's really the only way I could see a trade being bigger than this. But so in my opinion, this, and this isn't necessarily a hot take, this is probably going to be the biggest trade of this NBA trade cycle. This will probably be the last time that I'll touch on this topic. I mean, what I expected to happen has not happened yet, and has not even really been close to happening. I mean, with the backyard break situation, no real statement from whatnot. Like they in the most recent news is that, like, I guess Grant, who is the main guy at Backyard Breaks, who's the one that said the crazy thing on stream, his account's been banned. But from what I'm seeing, that some of the other Backyard Breaks accounts aren't banned, and like, I mean, they're the biggest breakers on the platform for the most part. Like at the past couple nationals, they've had one of the bigger breaker booths with Whatnot. So it's like Whatnot is making what I think is probably a pretty bad business decision, like in the short term, like, or no, long term. Because short term, by banning them, you are obviously taking away probably you're taking away the commission from one of the biggest breakers on the platform. But at the same time, they are hurting their reputation by not like making a statement, or not, not making an example of them, because by just banning them, they're kind of just saying like, you know, they're really not they're doing nothing essentially, and it's really kind of odd. I don't know. I guess maybe a statement isn't something. If they haven't made statements on anything else, it's kind of like Panini, where if they haven't made statements on anything else, why are they going to start today? But at the same time, it's like, you gotta put your foot down here. Like, I don't know. I'm not sure why they're not doing that. But so there have been some bans. There's been no statements so far. I mean, depending on when you're listening to this, or when you're listening to this, there may have been more of a statement put out. But at least we're a week past. We're like a week past. It's been almost a week. So like, I'm not sure what the plan is for them, but I don't know. I mean, maybe I'll do a quick update if something else happens, but this is kind of the last piece that I want to talk about for that. The other story that I guess is kind of a story, it kind of isn't. I think it's a story. Um, I guess Shohei Ohtani is changing his autograph, and Topps is promoting the change in the autograph. Um, but the way that they're promoting it, I think, is a little odd. Like, and I think the autograph itself within Topps and Fanatics has become, I don't know, they've been doing more like inscriptions, like more telling the people to do inscriptions. Like, a bunch of the Brady cards have inscriptions, a bunch of Bowman draft cards have inscriptions. Like, they're doing the first ever Bowman with Wembanyama. They're telling the players to do inscriptions. So they're promoting that the autographs are more rare. Like on their Instagram, they essentially said, like, or actually, I'm just going to quote it. They said, like many great athletes before him, Shohei Ohtani is experimenting with a new autograph. Shohei has signed several copies of his Topps finest cards with the new signature, making these rare cards the first of their kind. I don't think that is how I don't think that's a good way to market them. I think from a no, I think it is. I think it's a fine way to market them. I don't think it is a ethical way of promoting these autographs. And I think also at some point there has to be, they almost should do a database that says what this person's autograph looks like. And I get that every athlete changes their autograph throughout their career, but it's like, again, Topps and Fanatics and sports cards, the whole industry as a whole has made the autograph such an important part of boxes and of the economy of breaking and all of these things, that to not have more extensive information about these autographs feels a little like they're not that they're trying to get away with anything, but that like they don't really care. That's how I'd put it. Um, and to promote that these new autographs are first of their kind and that they're rare, it's like, yeah, but like, what happens when they're not? Like, what happens when Shohei Ohtani decides he's going to just change it to this new autograph? Like, then they don't, then they're not rare. And it's like, I don't know. I think it's the marketing department at Tops and Fanatics has done, I think, a pretty good job. I think that there have been some things that I wouldn't have promoted them in the way that they did. I think that there have been, Tops has done a good job at sort of fixing mistakes by changing the way things are configured in a way. Like, we had Bowman, this is way back. This is Bowman first edition we had, where some of the autographs were smudged, and I believe that those autographs were then put into Bowman first edition rather than just the regular Bowman product, which that is a product that I feel like needs some investigation done on it a little bit. Not I may look, I may try to look into. I don't know how I would even research this at all, but like the I just wonder if what they promote, what was in the packs was actually in there. Like, I'm just wondering if all of, because they had numbered to 99 autographs in Bowman first. So it's like, we're all these cards in these Bowman first packs. Like, I don't know. And again, I don't, it, I think I wish I could give companies more of the benefit of the doubt, but I also think that we've seen that these companies really, I don't want to say don't deserve it, but like that they are going to do whatever they're going to do from a business perspective for what's good for the business, not exactly the collector. I think that they have, like Tops, for example, I think that they have done some good stuff for collectors, but ultimately they're going to do what they think is best for the business, which is not necessarily wrong. I don't want to sit here and say that I think that they're wrong for doing that. I do think that maybe the marketing around trying to increase the hobby was very sort of vague and kind of, and I'm not criticizing them for the 10x thing. I think a ton of other people have done that. But like the 10x is very vague. Like they said they want to 10x the hobby, but they didn't really specify exactly how, like, or what they were going to try and do. I think clearly the college stuff, WWE stuff. I mean, I think that there have been avenues where they've expanded the business that they have and the licenses that they have for sure. Um, but I also don't know if, I think that there's probably also a little bit of a factor where it's like, well, we also want to 10x our business itself. So I think that it's probably both sides. And I think the one of ones definitely has helped in the past year. Like, I mean, millions of dollars is probably not like going to make a huge dent into someone like Michael Rubin's bank account, which, he's obviously, it's not his bank account necessarily, but it's Fanatics. So, but to do that a couple times and to have a couple different cards really reach that couple $1 million area where you're selling the Tops now, again, I hope that they bring that back into this, which I think in theory, maybe they have introducing some new things. But I think the way that, like, for example, this autograph being like, there not being more information on certain athletes' autographs, like Jackson Morrell, I believe, is a rookie from this past year, and I saw a tweet like last week or 2 weeks ago that was like he has had like 10 different autographs in products, like almost every single product he's signing the card differently. And that, I think, is fine if Tops is also going to acknowledge that the autographs are different, which is where the database, I think, would come into play. Because if you have autographs within a database, then you are going to be able to say that this is, I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily not authentic an autograph, but it's like just being able to have the information there, I think gives you a little bit more credibility when it comes to any type of skepticism around autographs. Because I think we have seen some issues with them, whether it's, the LaMelo Ball autographs that people thought was Bridges that was signing them, or somebody else was signing them, or it was the Luca autographs that were apparently people say that they were signed by his mom signed them, or I mean, there was an issue with the Dak Prescott autographs where it was signed with just like a computerized pen, and then you have the Anthony Richardson's autographs, which are just like, again, he got some flack for it, and then eventually he just goes AR, and that's it. So I on one hand I like that autographs are in these products, but on the other hand, I hope that in the future we can get more clarity around them, and not in the way that we have done this, but in the way that's like Topps is telling you that the autograph is going to be different and what the autograph is going to look like. Just like I said, to give a little bit more clarity to collectors and to give a little more peace of mind to people who are, pulling these autographs that could be worth hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars in some cases. On an episode last week, I talked about the difference in some of the gem percentages from this year's Prism football. And something that somebody brought up on Twitter today that I was pretty surprised by, that I had actually, or not today, it's yesterday, depending on when you're listening to this. Today is in when I'm recording. Something that it it confuses me. On one hand, I can see why they wouldn't come out with this information, but at the same time, it feels like a pretty big change for them to just start doing things differently. So PSA, they on their website, someone took a screenshot from their website, and their description of what a PSA 10 is, approximately 55-45 percent on the front, which I think that has to do with the like width of whatever the border is and the centering. And for a while, it used to be 60-40. And that could be, I mean, that would be a main reason why we've seen a big difference in the Prism cards. Now, I don't know if I'm them, I wouldn't change the whole. Unfortunately, I think with grading now and with the modern day sports cards, I think you have to decide which cards are going to be graded which way. I just don't think that you can broadly grade a card from even the 80s or 90s the same as you would grade a card today, because for a multitude of different reasons. I mean, production's better. There's more cards, so there's going to be, maybe there's going to be a difference in, like I said, centering. And I just think the more cards, and then also just the actual how the cards are made is much different than it used to be. And I have said that I thought PSA should be switching their standards a little bit, because I thought that the PSA 10 was almost becoming not as important. But the weird thing was that it's not, it is important, but it's not, because in my mind, I was seeing it and thinking, oh, well, eventually the PSA 10 is not going to hold as much value as it used to. Like getting your cards graded, if, hypothetically, if you're grading 20 cards and 20 of the same card, for example, and the gem rate is 50% and 50% are coming back tens, like that seems unsustainable when it comes to how many cards there are in the market nowadays. And for them to switch from, 60-40 to 55-45, it's not like a massive switch, but like when we're talking cards, that's millimeters. Like that's a difference of between, that's the difference between millimeters, and that's the difference between a card being a potential like $300 card, or the card being a potential like $100 card, or even less than that, depending on if you're talking PSA 9 or PSA 10 or 9 or 8. So I like that they've switched this. I wonder if now that someone has called it out, and I'm talking about it here on the podcast, I don't know if anybody at PSA is necessarily listening to the podcast, but I think we're seeing we're seeing a little bit of traction on that post on Twitter. And I think something that also I found a little bit interesting was on that on the post, the original post. So actually, sorry, it's Premier Kicks _2. And the first post I thought was interesting, or the first comment was, this is a bad change. I think it might hurt PSA in the long term. One of the biggest reasons that people shy away from Beckett is because of how strict they are on centering. And yeah, I think so. I don't think that's the only reason necessarily why people are moving away from Beckett to PSA, or just using PSA just in general. I think that, yeah, and this is the double edged sword here. It's like you want all of your cards, like you aren't sending, no one is sending in cards being like, oh, I hope I, unless you're sending in, if you're sending in modern stuff, let's just get that straight. Because if you're sending in vintage stuff, a PSA 8 or a PSA 9 is phenomenal. But if you're sending anything that's modern, if you're getting anything less than a 9, you're barely going to break even probably on the grading costs and whatever it costs for the card. So I don't think, I don't think that it is PSA's place to judge a card that is going to determine the value. I think it is their place to grade the card. And I know what I just said may not exactly line up with with that next statement. With they are not to determine, they are not here to determine what a card should be worth. They are going to grade the card, obviously. But I think to say that it's keeping people away from Beckett, I just think that people have been kind of shying away from Beckett for quite some time here, over the past few years, realistically. And I think also one big thing that I think is, I guess, a problem with Beckett is like the amount of RPAs I think is down pretty substantially, because a lot of the big players that would have RPAs, would have National Treasures RPAs, would have any flawless RPAs or impeccable or any of the Panini brands, like they just don't have those cards anymore. So instead, people are not, I don't think it's that people are not buying National Treasures. I think the value of National Treasures has plummeted, in my opinion, over the past few years. Just from the sense that they don't, just from the fact that they don't have the big players in the product. So that is an unfortunate thing. I don't really love that part of it. Like there will be this year, there'll be JJ McCarthy RPAs. That will probably be the big RPA, because I don't think any of the other players have any autographs. Like I don't think Bo Nix or Jaden Daniels or Caleb Williams have. Pretty sure they're tops and Fanatics exclusive athletes. So the someone who maybe was a grader of RPAs, they were going with Beckett, so maybe they just would go all with Beckett. But if they're not going to get the RPAs of those big players, they're just not grading with Beckett. So on one hand, I don't think that people are, I think people are going with PSA because they hold better value. I think, yeah, maybe Beckett is a little bit of a harder grade. Like maybe the centering and all of that stuff is going to be a little bit of a harder grade, but I don't think someone is necessarily choosing PSA over Beckett. Or actually, no, I think people are choosing PSA over Beckett potentially on getting higher grades, but I think also those higher grades from PSA are just going to equate to a better value for the card. So, like for Beckett, I think that unfortunately people are going with PSA because they are a little bit hard, they're a little bit easier to grade. But I also think that like Beckett was also losing some ground in the grading industry anyways. Like PSA has really gone through quite a bit of not even a resurgence, but like they have really grown their brand to a pretty exponential point compared to where they were a couple years ago, where Beckett and PSA were one and the same. Like you would see the same amount of Beckett and PSA slabs at a show. And if I had to guess nowadays, if you're going over to any table that has modern or any like newer cards, they're going to be 90% PSA. So I think it's good that PSA is adjusting their standards a little bit, because I think it's going to, yes, maybe people could decide to grade their cards less. Um, but I also think that this seems like a big enough change, in my opinion, that PSA probably should put out a statement, or they should have, because if they are changing how they're grading, and people are still submitting cards thinking it's the old system, that doesn't seem very fair. On one hand, on the other hand, if I'm people and I'm getting cards graded and you're choosing PSA, and PSA changes their grading standards, like I don't know what else you can really do there. Like, unfortunately, or not unfortunate, but fortunately, the news I think has kind of gotten out now. So I think people are going to know about it over the next like few weeks, few months. And ultimately, yes, maybe in the short term, it hurts PSA because people are going to not go with PSA. But I think ultimately it's going to help the overall market of PSA 10s because this shift in the percentage of how many like what they consider centered versus uncentered is going to help the overall value of PSA 10s for anything going forward in the long run, in my opinion. Kind of a cool update that I saw. Collects, I think it was Will Stern from Collects put out an article. I guess they must have a rep from eBay who gives them this information because when I was searching for it, I could not find the source. They were the only source I could find. They put out something that apparently there was a 1,600% increase in the amount of eBay traffic from oh no sorry, it was 1,150%. Sorry, I got the numbers wrong there. The day that Luca was traded, and then even with Anthony Davis, there was a 300% increase in his traffic on eBay. And I think it goes to the fact that, I wonder across the board, I would be very interested if eBay were to put out this data themselves across basically every single trade that happened, like all the big players at least. Because now we also have De'Aaron Fox going to the Spurs, which I think is actually a pretty big deal. And then you have Kyle Kuzma being traded. I mean, some names that are pretty big within the sports card industry. I would be interested to see after the trade deadline if eBay comes out with any type of information about basically this, because like I said, they reached out to Collects about this, and so they put out the information, which I think is very, very cool and good that this information is out there. It's not information that's available to the public, unfortunately, but also like the index for Luca's cards, I believe, also increased. That's something that is public knowledge. And the last interesting piece here was that the Luka Doncic was searched during the day of the trade 80 times a minute on eBay. So it goes to show, I think when you have a lot of when you have a lot of interest in a player that happens to be in a trade. I mean, I don't want to say this was unprecedented that this happened with Luca, but I mean, it's probably one of the biggest blockbuster trades in NBA history. I mean, it's like if you were to hypothetically have traded Michael Jordan like a couple years into his career. I mean, I'm obviously not comparing Jordan and Luca, but like the level of play for both of those players, like if you look at a lot of records that Luca has, I mean, it's him and LeBron in terms of like, I think there was some statistic that was like certain amount of rebounds, certain amount of assists, and certain amount of points under the age of 25. Like it's literally Luca and LeBron. So to say that Luca, I think he will probably go down as one of the better basketball players of all time. Does he go down as the best player of, I don't know. I think that there's like generations. I think you could look at like, I don't know where it starts necessarily. I mean, maybe it's the 2010s potentially, like rookies in the 2010s. I think you had because that would leave Curry out of the previous generation. Curry, Durant, LeBron would be in the previous like 2000s, early 2000s, and then 2010s might be like Tatum, Brown, or maybe potentially might be in that conversation. Luca's obviously in that conversation. Anthony Edwards is going to be in that conversation, obviously. So I don't know. I think it's maybe something that would happen with other players, maybe not to the extent that like 1,000% increase, because Luca is still a player that people are searching for a lot. So that's not super surprising, but the increase is definitely something that I thought was very interesting. And the other topic that I want to talk about is first off the line, WNBA Prism dropped. And apparently, so I'm going to read a take from Run Good Life, who I think is a phenomenal follow on Twitter. I don't necessarily agree with everything he has to say, but I think he has some great opinions, and I think thought provoking opinions that, like I said, I've talked about him a couple times on this podcast, and this was one that I thought was very interesting. I don't know if he I think he uses some bad language in here, so I'm not, or no, maybe not actually, but he is very direct. That's what I'll say. So there was 1,500 Prism at WNBA first off line boxes that sold at $2,200 with the floor. So it was like the Dutch auction. So like some of them sold higher, some of them didn't. Well, actually, some of them sold higher, but the $2,200 was the floor. So that's where it sold out. So roughly that means that Panini made $3.5 million on that drop. And he is not very happy about it, that basically this product, if depending on because it sold at $2,200, people are going to have to price it, if you it's a which essentially it's probably breakers are going to have to price it at like super crazy high, because Caitlin Clark is, the player in that product. I think it's actually a pretty solid product, if I'm going to be completely honest with some of the other rookies that are in there. Angel Reese, Cameron Brink, Camila Cardozo, I think they're all rookies in that product. So I think it's going to be a very good product for many years to come. But the problem that I think he has here, and that I have sort of thought about a little bit here, is that the price of that box at $2,000 is not worth three extra numbered to 20 or numbered to three parallels. And for anybody who's buying into breaks of that product, you're basically going to have to hit one of the Caitlin Clarks to make any of your money back, because just, if you figure there's 12 teams, if 12 teams in the WNBA, you pick your team. If you're dividing that 12 the 2000 number, let's just round it up to 2400, that means you're essentially spending $200, potentially even higher than that, to get into some of these breaks. I mean, that's if the breakers decide to break, no pun intended, to break even on the product. So they're obviously not looking to break even on the product. This is a business, so they're going to be making money. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a $500, $600, $700 spot for this type of product. And I think, I don't know. I'm thinking that there needs to be more regulations on boxes from sports card companies. Like, I think that they need to go to eBay and they need to go to these sellers and say, you can't sell the boxes secondary. And I guess maybe that might sort of defeat the purpose of breaking, I guess. But like, for anybody to get their hands on this product, it's like, sure, it's first off the line, so it is kind of exclusive. It's supposed to be hard to get. I think regular Prism probably won't be super hard to get. I think, unfortunately, we're going to be looking at like a 2017 to 2018 Prism, like how they jumped up in the production. I mean, obviously, this is going to be Panini's probably their last chance to make money on any product throughout the or at least through a WNBA product. 'Cause I think WNBA should be going over with the NBA once that switches over to Fanatics. But I think that companies potentially need to step in and say, like, hey, you can't, or they need to step in and say, you're not allowed to sell this product for more than what we are selling it for, or what the MSRP should be. And I think that goes for retailers also, like, Target and Walmart. I think that the sports card companies need to step in here and say, hey, we're just going to decide what we're going to sell this to. And I don't know what the process should be for selling the first off the line Prism. I realistically think there has to be some sort of rewards program for people who are trying to buy this box, rather than the Dutch auction, because the Dutch auction, in theory, yes, it gives everyone the opportunity to buy the box. Because if you were to put that box at $1,000, it would sell out in a millisecond, because everyone would just be buying the box and then trying to resell it. So I think that there needs to be some sort of other way that Panini and Topps, with maybe Bowman or Topps Chrome Sapphire, need to look at these products, and they need to be able to get the products into collectors' hands, without there having to be this like monstrous markup on it. And I don't know. I mean, Ron Goodlife, he's pretty angry at the breakers that apparently are buying this product, because at $2,200, nobody should be buying a $2,200 box of Prism first off the line for a bunch of base cards. Like, it really is pretty wild that like Panini even is like selling the product at that level. Because ultimately, I think you're going to find that a lot of people are not going to make any amount of money back from this product. I think this is maybe it's going to be a really good product if you pull a Caitlin Clark, and potentially maybe not even that good depending on what you bought it at. But if you're not pulling any Caitlin Clarks, you're really looking at a pretty big loss. And I think ultimately we've seen a pretty big shift in how much people can make money wise from sports card boxes. And honestly, it really starts from the top with Panini and Fanatics. So, in my opinion, I think that they need to figure out a different way to sell these boxes to the public so that way people can actually get them at a reasonable price. And there's a potential that they can make money or make their money back from buying the box. So, this will be a topic I'll be talking about on Hobby Hotline this weekend a little bit more in depth, I think, because you do need a little bit of a visual on this topic. So if you want to hear and you want to see me talk more about this, make sure to check out Hobby Hotline this weekend or tomorrow, I guess, depending on when you're listening to this. But the story of the day or so has been that apparently Panini has been using AI art on their downtowns, which uh, if you know anything about the art industry and the AI art, it is like so clearly obvious that they used AI. Like the buildings on the New England one don't look anything like any of the buildings in Boston, which maybe they don't have the. In theory, you could say, well, they don't have the rights to those buildings, sure, but like then you also have the Atlanta card with I believe it's Bijan Robinson and Penix. The field isn't even in the right direction. The lines of the field are going the wrong way on the field. Also, Atlanta, they have a dome stadium, and it really is. I'm pretty frustrated if I'm going to be completely honest with this decision here by Panini that to do this because I think the use of AI art is so lazy and so just as someone who has a background in graphic design, just like pay someone to do it. Like it's really the and I don't think again this is one of the things where it's like maybe the people online are mad about this, but I don't think it's going to affect any Panini sales. But I just it's at this point Panini is just going out sad. That's what I'll say. Like they're really throwing in the towel here. They just don't care. And I mean, not that like it's not like I was buying Panini products anyways, but I don't foresee myself ever buying another Panini product. I mean, just from the simple fact of what they've done over the past few years has been really bad. And now they're using AI art on cards that are supposed to be the biggest cards that are coming out of a product that really like is supposed to be just like a base product. It's supposed to be like Donruss football is just supposed to be like series 1. It's supposed to be a base product that's super easy to get, super inexpensive. You're not really getting too many good cards out of it. And now the only good cards you're getting out of it are going to be using AI art. So, I'll point out some more stuff on the show this weekend, but that's my rant on that one, unfortunately. So we are going into the final week of the NFL, the Super Bowl this weekend. It came up pretty quick, if I'm going to be honest. I mean, even 2 weeks ago, I thought I was going to be doing more episodes on the players in the Super Bowl. I mean, I don't know. I think from a sports card perspective, like the Chiefs being in it again, I don't really think the Chiefs players will be affected. I think if Worthy, if he has a good game, that could be potentially a good or a bad thing, depending on what side of the aisle you're on for new products this year. Like if Worthy has a great game, it could be something that people want to buy his cards and that drives up prices. I don't really know. But then, I talked at length about Saquon Barkley and that 2018 Prism product. So there isn't a huge amount to talk about overall for what's left of the Super Bowl. I'll probably cover it on like Monday or Tuesday's episode after the game. But the thing that I think is most interesting about the Super Bowl is that the NBA trade deadline has basically taken over the sports news cycle. And realistically, I think this is probably one of the craziest trade deadlines of all time. So in theory, it actually probably I don't think it helped the Super Bowl at all. I just don't think that there were any storylines and anybody like there were no new teams. It was teams that have already played each other. It's Mahomes who's playing in the Super Bowl again. It's Hurts who's playing in the Super Bowl again. It's everybody who, you know, for the third time in a row, the Chiefs are playing, and for the second time in 2 years, it's Chiefs Eagles. So it's like the storylines are not really there this year. So that could be the reason why I think the sports news cycle was really dominated by the NBA trade deadline versus the Super Bowl. Like, and it really is kind of unfortunate in my opinion because well, I don't know. It's unfortunate. I remember growing up and there I mean maybe it's just that there's not as much parity as there was, which granted the Patriots were playing in the Super Bowl a lot, so maybe that's why I was more excited for the Super Bowl. But it even felt like when the Patriots weren't playing, like media day was always super fun. I feel like I didn't really see anything crazy coming out of media day other than like some reporter asking Kelsey some like weird question about like phantom 15-yard penalty calls. But one post that I did see that was very interesting, actually, I actually couldn't believe it when I saw it, was somebody was talking about the difference in post numbers for specific things in the NBA versus the NFL. And it was like something where it was the news of, I believe the posts that were compared were like the news that it was some news about Travis Kelsey, but and then also the Daniel Tice trade. And if you don't know who that name is, you shouldn't because it's just some random role player in the NBA who used to play for the Celtics. That's how I know who that is. But the posts in the same amount of time, someone was comparing the two posts, and you had 3 times as many likes and engagement on the NBA trade post of some random player versus the NFL Super Bowl post. And I don't know, on one hand, I guess I understand that people are angry about that they think the NFL, the refs are on the Chiefs side, but I do think that this year is probably going to show that like I don't know. I don't know if the NFL really wants the Chiefs to be in this game anymore. Like, so like that's the thing. It's like the NFL clearly they're not delusional. Like they can see what the narrative is of this game and that people maybe don't want to watch it. And from that standpoint, I think also from a sports car perspective, like I don't see anybody's cards really changing that much. I think Mahomes, his like rookie cards already have Super Bowls and MVPs baked into them. So like if you're buying a Mahomes card, just expect to hold that for a while. And because I just don't see how I don't see the ceiling going much higher on that card. But the floor is pretty much the floor where it is now, in my opinion. I mean, I think you're going to see some fluctuation this offseason. And then right before the season, you do start to see an uptick because that's at least from the past few years. That's how I've seen the cycle of sports card prices have been off season, things drop off, and then literally right before, and you would think it would be middle of the season, but no, it's like right before the season is about to start. That is when cards are at the peak price for the secondary market. So, like I said, maybe from a sports card perspective, I don't think anybody's cards are going to massively change this year because of the Super Bowl. I mean, you could see like again, I think if a random player goes off. I think even maybe Jalen Hurts. Like the only thing is that like all the good players that are expected to play well, their cards are already priced where I think they should be. And if you're buying any cards before the Super Bowl, that's definitely not the move. You definitely shouldn't be doing that. I think you probably will see a bump or two from some players, but then once the offseason comes around, that's when you're going to see prices start to drop a little bit. And that is when you're going to see an opportunity to buy some of these players that you might want to buy either to collect or if you want to buy and sell before the beginning of the season, that's probably the right time. But I think ultimately this is sort of just the cycle of sports cards, really. Like, and I think that's one of the interesting things about this market and this industry is that The cycles do change from time to time, but you can almost really see the patterns starting to form, especially over these past few years. I think maybe if you went from like 2018 to 2021, that's where you started to see some shakeups in the cycle. But I think since 2022 ish, we've started to go back to where I think you can pretty much reliably count on when cards are going to go up and down. So, like I said, if you're looking to buy any football cards, realistically, it might just be worth waiting until the season's over, just so that way you're not spending an arm and a leg to buy a card that, like, in a few weeks, you probably could buy a few of them or at least one or two for the same price, if not cheaper.